Hey guys, Booligan here with Booligan Shooting Sports. What if I told you that I got something German-made, polymer-framed, striker-fired, and gas delay blowback? You'd think, oh, you know what you'd think. You'd think I got myself an H&K P7. I didn't get myself an H&K P7. Sorry to disappoint, guys. But what I did get is this very interesting and kind of unloved compact concealed carry pistol made by Walther. This is the unfortunately named Walther CCP. And what I like to do in this video is go over some of the pros and cons and to see if this is a failure of a design, is it a success of a design, and is it a decent carry concealed handgun. The basis of this is that, as I said, it is a polymer framed, striker fired, compact, single stack 9mm handgun. It is designed to be a concealed carry pistol, hence the name that it unfortunately shares with the ruling Communist Party of China, the CCP. It is roughly the same size as something like a Glock 43. But with those really famous Walther ergonomics and a couple of unfortunate downsides in the design. First and foremost, it uses an 8-round magazine. It is a single stack steel magazine. You see this one is loaded. Well, the rest of the gun is not, but it is a 8-round steel magazine with an extended little lip here on the bottom, which makes for a very comfortable grip. This single stack design means the frame can be quite narrow, but it's not really as narrow as it could be. They could have done something like a 1.5 stack, a little bit of a stagger stack to make up some of this space. Because if you look inside the frame, it's a little hard to see. If you look inside the frame, there are alignment ribs for the magazine that kind of take up a lot of space. And the lower magazine capacity is actually one of the pretty major downsides of this gun compared to something like the Glock 43, which has, I believe, like a 10 and a 12 round capacity. So you are losing a non-inconsequential amount of ammunition capability with roughly the same frame size. That is, I think, a miss on the part of Walther. We will be playing with this gun the rest of the way without a magazine and again on an empty chamber. There were 2 versions of this gun. This is the CCP M2. So this is the later version of it that fixed a lot of the issues of the first generation. The first generation had a couple of pretty serious problems. First off, you needed to use a tool to disassemble the gun. Disassembly was very finicky and you had to have a little tool that they included in order to do so. We'll attempt to disassemble this on camera, but it is still a little finicky to disassemble, but we'll try to get that done. There were also a large number of Generation 1 CCPs that were not drop safe. They would fire if dropped. They would also be able to fire kind of regardless of where the safety is, which we'll talk about in a second. And they issued a recall on them. The M2 variants, if you are in the market for one of these, are not subject to that same recall or those drop safe issues. You can tell if you have a Generation 1 that had the recall done because there's a little dot that's been machined in the magwell, and the information for that is on Walther's website. The controls for this are quite basic. You have a standard trigger. There's no sort of trigger safety or anything on it because you do have a manual safety. Now, I have pretty large hands and the gun fits me very, very well, and I can pretty easily activate and deactivate that. It has a good solid click to it where it's most likely not going to accidentally be triggered. However, I don't love manual safeties on most guns, but in this case, it's pretty unobtrusive. It's easy to keep it on or off, whatever your preference may be. It's pretty easy to work around. The slide catch extends a fair bit and has a nice little sharp edge on there. When I say nice, I do not mean nice. because when you shoot it with a traditional high thumb grip, your thumb can kind of rub on that, and that could either potentially initiate a malfunction, which hasn't happened in any of my shooting with this, but it is something to look out for. Just, you know, remember to kind of keep your thumb low on there to avoid hitting that. But it works fine, and you can easily get it and click it down there as needed. But it's just not the best shape. You have a very short rail up front where you could fit a very compact light or laser, just as long as you have the right key in place to align with wherever the proper rail segments are. The ergonomics of this are really where this whole design shines. Walther knows how to make a comfortable gun, and the CCP is no exception. It fits, and I've got really big mitts here. It fits my big hand so well, but at the same time, my wife, who has very small hands, also can get a really good comfortable grip on it. The undercut trigger guard really lets you get your hand up underneath it. There's a great angle here on the back strap that just eats up your hand and prevents slide bite. It's just an incredibly comfortable gun, and because of that, it is incredibly easy to shoot this accurately, to get a consistent grip on the draw and bring out to exactly where it needs to be in order to get your rounds on target. It has this, it's an unfortunate looking texture here. It kind of looks like pubes. I hate to bring it down to that base of a level, but it just looks like you stuck some glue on the grip and dropped it on a barbershop floor. It's just this weird grip texture that works. It's so comfortable to hold, and it keeps in your hand really, really well. Traditionally little, small, compact, lightweight 9mm handguns like this have pretty stout recoil because they're not heavy. They don't have a lot of weight behind them. And this one has its party trick up its sleeve, which we'll talk about in a second, but it keeps your hand really well gripped. The magazine release is located on the left side, and I actually believe you can switch it to either side. The magazines really look like you can. I haven't dug into it because I am right-handed, so all of the controls being on the right side are good for me. One thing I will note, there are no other controls on the left side. I believe you can switch the magazine release, but that's it. The sights are drift adjustable rear, fixed front, and they are 3-dot white dot sights that are pretty quick to acquire, and they work really well. You'll notice this little red nub here. This is your striker indicator. It's not a loaded chamber indicator. On top of the on top of the slide, there's a little cutout where you could see if you do have a loaded round in there. This is just the striker indicator, and it's tactile. You can feel it without looking that nub is protruding, and it is a red nub. Pretty hard to miss. And that is nice for you to know that your gun is cocked. You'll notice there's no recoil spring here, and that's because there is no traditional underbarrel recoil spring assembly. As I said before, this uses a gas delayed blowback system. It's not a tilting barrel, and as we move the slide back, you'll notice that the barrel is fixed. It stays in place. That leads to this being a quite accurate handgun. Even though it has a short sight radius and a short barrel, it is very easy to accurately put rounds on target with this gun. The only downside really being the trigger, which is not fantastic. Again, working with an empty chamber here, the trigger has, do it from this side. The trigger, this is all just squish. And then it breaks. It's a squish, squish, squish until you hit a wall, and then it breaks. The reset is long and not particularly tactile. So you can't really ride the reset on this. The reset is almost completely returning. So when you're shooting, you are doing full trigger pulls And you need to train accordingly, because if you're used to something like a Glock or a CZ that has a pretty short reset with a really good tactile click, you are not going to have that with this gun. This isn't a precision shooter. This is designed to draw, put 8 rounds on target, and then holster, hopefully ending whatever conflict prompted you to draw your handgun in the first place. So the trigger is a little bit of a shortcoming here. However, you can polish certain interfaces on there to smooth it up. I will most likely do that, and if I do that, I will do a video showing what I did. Disassembly. Let's do our best to disassemble this guy. So on the M1, as I said, there's like a tool you have to jam in there. On this, there's none of that. You just have to press in the striker plate and slide that little guy to the right. That then releases the striker and the striker spring. You can then pull back the slide just a bit. Don't need to pull it back a lot, just enough to clear it off the rail, which then allows you to disassemble the slide from the gun. Now you'll notice this little floppy dangly guy here. This is your gas piston. Underneath the barrel, there's a little hole that this nestles in. There is a hole inside the barrel where it bleeds off gas from firing the gun and pressurizes this little cylinder down here. And what happens is then when you shoot the gun, take the recoil spring, it's a very different recoil spring because it surrounds the barrel, and it doesn't need to be a very heavy recoil spring, which we'll get to in a moment. But what happens is as you shoot the gun, the slide naturally wants to go back because of recoil. It's an unlocked design otherwise. But what happens is that pressurized cylinder, which has extracted gas off of firing the round, is fighting against this piston as it goes back, which slows down the recoil impulse and first off makes the gun safe to shoot with 9mm with a minimal amount of slide weight, but also makes a very comfortable shooting gun. If you've shot something like a Glock 26, you probably know it's pretty snappy just because you don't have a ton of weight in the slide. It's just not the most comfortable thing in the world. So this really helps with that. Let's try to get this reassembled. It's a little tricky at first, but what you're trying to do is you have to align this piston with that hole. So you kind of like dangle it down a little bit and you watch it through the gap. It's not too bad. There you go. Pull it back and get it back on the rails. You then get that striker spring back in there. And this is always the part that trips me up just a little bit. But you need to get that striker assembly back in place. So you pull it back. And push that back in place as you are pulling the slide back. Function check, make sure your striker still goes, make sure your trigger still goes, and you're back in business. That was actually relatively smooth disassembly of this guy. This one I bought secondhand. I bought it because it's interesting. I like guns that have weird firing systems, and how often do you find an affordable gun that has a an affordable pistol with a gas delayed piston system? You don't find that too often. There are very few guns that use this system. This, aside from everything else about the gun, is functionally, internally, pretty much the same as an H&K P7. Obviously the difference with the P7 being it has like the grip striker, pre-cocker and stuff like that. That's a different system. But it uses a strikingly similar gas delayed piston system. This one is the two-tone stainless model. They have these in a variety of colors. Some of them are quite tacky. Black on black would have been better, but this is what was available locally used for inexpensive. There are holsters for these. I often am carrying this guy in this holster right here, an LAG tactical Walther Kydex holster. It works quite well. It sits pretty close to the body. I am quite fat, if you didn't notice by watching this channel. So I stick out a little bit, but I'm easily able to carry this guy at 3 o'clock with a little bit of a forward cant, and it sits well. It tucks tight against the body because it is a slimline design. It's not blocky at all. I mean, it's got these great curves to it that just tuck in and hide. And it honestly makes a very good carry conceal pistol for me. Now the downsides, as I said, the trigger is not good. It's usable, it is a fine combat trigger, but it is not great. So if you plan on getting one of these, understand that you will need some range time in order to learn how to properly shoot this well with that trigger. And the magazine capacity is really kind of what kills me a little bit. If they were able to have this, like I said, with 10 or 12 rounds, and I easily think that they could have done that by not having these ribs in here and instead have done a stack and a half, just a slightly staggered magazine. They could have fit more in there, but I'm not an engineer at Walther. It is not my place to dictate that. But I really wish they had this same platform in roughly the same size, but with another 2 or 3 rounds on board. 10, 11, 12 rounds on this would just be fantastic, because otherwise this is a great gun. Because it doesn't have a locking like a Browning action barrel or anything like that, or tilting barrel action, because it doesn't have any of that. It has that really light recoil spring, which means it is super easy to pull back and cock the gun, which is really helpful for either shooters with diminished grip strength, or sometimes on like a Glock 26 it's hard to just take that thing back, and you don't have to on this. It's super lightweight, and that's one of the biggest benefits of this platform and that gas delayed system, is it doesn't need to have that super heavy sprung assembly. But yeah, so this guy is, for the last couple of weeks after I was, put a bunch of rounds through it and made sure that it works well, this has been riding in my holster, and I really like it. I just wish that Walther, maybe in the next version, maybe in the M3 version, will get a CCP with a double stack or stack and a half staggered magazine to give me a little bit more capacity, maybe improve that trigger a little bit, and for the love of God, maybe rename it after something that isn't the ruling Communist Party of China. Thanks for watching.